The funeral director's face went completely white when I walked through the chapel doors, very much alive, to attend my own husband's memorial service. What Marcus didn't know was that I had discovered his elaborate insurance fraud scheme 3 days earlier, and I was about to turn his fake funeral into the most expensive mistake of his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Diana Castellano, and until 6 months ago, I believed I was living a stable, if unremarkable marriage, with my husband of 12 years. I am 41 years old and work as a senior financial analyst for Meridian Investment Group in downtown Chicago. My days are spent reviewing complex financial statements, identifying discrepancies in accounting records, and ensuring that investment portfolios comply with regulatory standards. The irony of my professional expertise would become painfully clear as this story unfolds. Marcus had always been the dreamer in our relationship, full of grand schemes and ambitious plans that somehow never materialized into sustainable success. He worked sporadically as a freelance marketing consultant, landing occasional contracts that provided irregular income while he pursued what he called his breakthrough opportunity. For 12 years, I had been the steady financial foundation that allowed him to chase these dreams, believing that supporting his entrepreneurial spirit was part of being a loving partner. Our marriage had settled into a comfortable routine that masked deeper issues I was only beginning to recognize. Marcus handled most of our personal financial matters, claiming it freed me to focus on my demanding career at Meridian. I trusted him completely with insurance policies, investment accounts, and household financial planning. This division of responsibilities seemed logical and efficient, allowing us both to concentrate on our respective strengths. The first indication that something was fundamentally wrong came on a Tuesday morning in March, when I received a call from Sandra Morrison, our insurance agent, asking to schedule a meeting to discuss updates to our life insurance policies. The request seemed routine until Sandra mentioned that she needed to clarify some recent changes Marcus had made, without my knowledge. "Mrs. Castellano, I wanted to review the beneficiary modifications and coverage increases your husband requested last month," Sandra explained during our phone conversation. "The adjustments are quite substantial, and company policy requires both spouses to acknowledge major policy changes." I felt a cold sensation in my stomach as Sandra described modifications I knew nothing about. Marcus had increased his life insurance coverage from $200,000 to $800,000, changed the beneficiary structure to eliminate his parents and sister, and added several riders that would increase payouts under specific circumstances. These changes had been processed using forged documents that bore my supposedly notarized signature. The discovery forced me to confront the possibility that my husband was planning something that required substantial life insurance coverage and my ignorance about the details. My professional experience with financial fraud investigations had taught me that sudden, secretive insurance policy changes often preceded elaborate schemes designed to exploit coverage for illegitimate purposes. That evening, I approached Marcus about the insurance modifications with carefully controlled curiosity, rather than direct confrontation. His response revealed both the depth of his deception and his underestimation of my intelligence. He claimed the changes were part of a comprehensive financial planning strategy he had been developing to secure our future, but his explanations contained inconsistencies that would have been obvious to anyone with basic financial knowledge. "Diana, I wanted to surprise you with how well I had been managing our insurance portfolio," Marcus said with the confident smile that had once charmed me but now seemed calculating. "The increased coverage provides better security for both of us, and the beneficiary changes streamline the payout process in case anything happens to either of us." His explanation made no financial sense. The beneficiary modifications he described would actually complicate rather than streamline any potential claims process. More significantly, the substantial increase in premium costs would strain our household budget in ways that contradicted his claims about improved financial security. Marcus was lying to me about something that could have serious legal and financial consequences. Over the following weeks, I began conducting discrete investigations into our financial situation using the same analytical techniques I employed for professional fraud detection. What I discovered revealed the extent of Marcus's deception and the sophistication of his planning for what I was beginning to suspect was an insurance fraud scheme. Marcus had been systematically accumulating debt in both of our names, while hiding the obligations from me through careful manipulation of our mail and online account access. Credit card balances, personal loans, and business financing agreements totaled over $120,000, creating financial pressures that made the increased life insurance coverage appear as a potential solution rather than legitimate protection. More troubling were the patterns I identified in Marcus's recent behavior changes. He had been documenting health complaints that had no basis in reality, creating a paper trail of medical concerns that could support future insurance claims. His internet search history, which I accessed through our shared computer, revealed extensive research into insurance policy terms, claim procedures, and legal precedents for disputed payouts. Most damning was my discovery of communications between Marcus and someone named Vincent Torino, whom I eventually identified as a private investigator with a questionable reputation. Their email exchanges discussed, quote, documentation services and, quote, identity verification procedures, in language that seemed designed to avoid explicit discussion of illegal activities while clearly planning something that required false documentation. The pieces of Marcus's scheme became clear as I continued my investigation with the systematic approach I used for complex financial analysis. He was planning to fake his own death, collect the insurance payout through an accomplice, and presumably start a new life elsewhere, while leaving me to deal with the debt obligations and legal consequences of his fraud. The realization that my husband was planning to betray me in such an elaborate and cruel manner created emotional turmoil that threatened to overwhelm my ability to think clearly. For 12 years, I had trusted him with our financial security, our future plans, and my emotional well-being. Learning that he viewed me as an obstacle to be eliminated, rather than a partner to be protected, was devastating in ways that went beyond simple financial betrayal. However, my professional training in financial investigation provided a framework for channeling my emotional response into constructive action. Rather than confronting Marcus immediately or seeking comfort from friends and family, I decided to gather comprehensive evidence about his scheme while developing a strategy to protect myself and ensure that his fraud attempt would fail catastrophically. The decision to investigate rather than confront required suppressing my natural desire for immediate answers and emotional resolution. I had to continue living with Marcus while knowing about his betrayal, maintaining normal interactions while secretly documenting his activities and preparing for the eventual confrontation that would determine the future of both our lives. This period of secret investigation was psychologically challenging in ways that tested my emotional resilience and professional objectivity. I was simultaneously the investigator and the victim, trying to maintain enough emotional distance to gather evidence effectively while processing the personal devastation of discovering that my marriage was built on manipulation and deception. The most difficult aspect of this situation was recognizing how Marcus had systematically undermined my confidence and autonomy throughout our marriage. His management of our personal finances had been presented as helpful support that allowed me to focus on my career, but I now understood it as a control mechanism that kept me ignorant about our true financial situation and vulnerable to his schemes. The pattern extended beyond financial matters to include social isolation that had gradually separated me from friends and family members who might have provided perspective or support. Marcus had a talent for creating plausible reasons why spending time with others was inconvenient or problematic, slowly reducing my network of independent relationships until he became my primary source of personal validation and guidance. The realization that I had been systematically manipulated for years created anger that fueled my determination to expose Marcus's fraud while protecting myself from the legal and financial consequences of his actions. This was not just about preventing an insurance scam, but about reclaiming my autonomy and demonstrating that his manipulation had ultimately made me stronger rather than more vulnerable. My professional expertise in financial investigation had equipped me with exactly the skills needed to unravel Marcus's scheme and document his activities in ways that would be useful for both insurance fraud prevention and potential criminal prosecution. The same analytical abilities he had tried to exploit by keeping me ignorant about our finances would become the tools for his exposure and accountability. As I prepared to gather the evidence needed to stop Marcus's fraud attempt, I felt a growing sense of empowerment that came from applying my professional competencies to protect my personal interests. This was an opportunity to prove that his manipulation had failed to diminish my capabilities, and that his underestimation of my intelligence would ultimately lead to his downfall. The investigation phase would require patience, strategic thinking, and emotional control, as I documented Marcus's activities while maintaining the pretense of ignorance about his scheme. The evidence I gathered would need to be comprehensive enough to prevent his fraud from succeeding, while protecting me from any legal liability associated with his actions. Most importantly, I was beginning to understand that this crisis represented an opportunity for personal transformation that would extend far beyond simply stopping Marcus's insurance fraud. This was my chance to reclaim control over my life, rebuild relationships that had been damaged by his manipulation, and demonstrate the strength and competence that had always existed beneath the surface of our dysfunctional marriage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The journey ahead would test every aspect of my character, professional skills, and emotional resilience. However, for the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about the future and confident in my ability to navigate whatever challenges Marcus's scheme would create. His attempt to exploit and abandon me would instead become the catalyst for discovering my own power and building a life based on authenticity rather than manipulation. The funeral he was planning would indeed mark the death of someone, but it would be the death of the naive, trusting woman who had allowed herself to be controlled and deceived. In her place would emerge someone stronger, wiser, and determined to build a life where trust was earned rather than assumed, and where strength came from within, rather than from dependence on others. The decision to investigate Marcus systematically rather than confront him immediately required suppressing every instinct I had developed over 12 years of marriage. My natural inclination was to demand explanations, seek reassurance, and attempt to resolve the situation through direct communication. However, my professional experience with financial fraud cases had taught me that premature confrontation often allows perpetrators to destroy evidence, modify their schemes, or accelerate their timelines to avoid detection. The morning after discovering the insurance policy modifications, I began implementing what I privately called Operation Documentation. This systematic approach would leverage my analytical skills and professional resources to gather irrefutable evidence about Marcus's activities, while maintaining the facade of normal marital interaction. The emotional discipline required for this approach was extraordinary, demanding that I compartmentalize my personal devastation while functioning as an objective investigator. My first priority was establishing secure documentation procedures that would protect any evidence I gathered from Marcus's potential interference. I opened a safety deposit box at a different bank branch, created encrypted digital storage accounts using my maiden name, and established communication channels that Marcus could not monitor. These preparations reflected lessons learned from corporate fraud investigations where evidence preservation often determined the success or failure of accountability efforts. The most challenging aspect of this phase was maintaining normal household routines while secretly monitoring Marcus's activities. I had to continue preparing meals, engaging in casual conversation, and participating in social events while internally processing the knowledge that the man I had shared my life with was planning to betray me in the most cruel and elaborate manner possible. The psychological strain of this double existence was unlike anything I had experienced in my professional or personal life. Marcus's behavior during this period provided additional confirmation that he was implementing a carefully planned scheme. His increased attention to physical fitness and health documentation suggested he was preparing for a lifestyle change that would require stamina and planning. More significantly, his gradual emotional withdrawal from our relationship indicated that he was psychologically preparing to abandon our life together without experiencing guilt or regret about the consequences for me. I began systematically reviewing our financial records to understand the full scope of Marcus's deception and the timeline for his scheme. The debt accumulation I had initially discovered represented only a portion of his financial manipulation. Additional investigation revealed that he had been systematically liquidating assets, redirecting investment account distributions, and establishing financial obligations that would become my responsibility after his supposed death. The pattern revealed sophisticated planning that had been developing for at least 18 months. Marcus had been gradually transferring money from our joint accounts to individual accounts I had no access to, using my electronic signatures to authorize transactions I was unaware of, and establishing credit agreements that leveraged our combined assets as collateral. The financial damage he had already caused totaled over $200,000, creating a level of debt that would be devastating for someone without significant income or resources. More troubling was my discovery that Marcus had been researching my professional background and salary information to calculate my capacity for managing the debt obligations he was planning to leave behind. His scheme was not simply about collecting insurance money, but about ensuring that I would be financially trapped by obligations I had not created and could not easily escape. This level of calculated cruelty revealed a side of his character that I had never suspected during our years together. The emotional impact of these discoveries was compounded by my recognition of how skillfully Marcus had manipulated my trust and affection throughout our marriage. Every conversation about our future, every expression of love and commitment, and every shared experience had been contaminated by his secret planning for betrayal. The man I thought I knew had never actually existed, replaced by someone who viewed our relationship as a resource to be exploited, rather than a partnership to be cherished. However, the systematic nature of Marcus's deception also provided me with advantages he had not anticipated. His extensive documentation of false health concerns, his communication with accomplices, and his financial manipulation had created a comprehensive trail of evidence that would be invaluable for both preventing his fraud and ensuring his prosecution. Marcus's belief that I was too trusting and professionally focused to investigate his activities had led him to maintain records that would ultimately ensure his exposure. The investigation process became a form of therapy that helped me channel my emotional turmoil into constructive action. Each piece of evidence I gathered represented a step toward reclaiming control over my life and demonstrating that Marcus's manipulation had not diminished my capabilities. My professional training in financial analysis provided a framework for understanding his scheme while building confidence in my ability to defeat his plans. During this period, I also began recognizing patterns of manipulation that had characterized our relationship from the beginning. Marcus's management of our social calendar had gradually isolated me from friends and family members who might have provided perspective about his behavior. His control over our financial planning had kept me ignorant about our true situation, while creating dependence that made me vulnerable to his schemes. His emotional manipulation had conditioned me to doubt my own judgment while accepting his explanations for increasingly suspicious activities. The realization that I had been systematically groomed for exploitation created anger that fueled my determination to ensure that Marcus's scheme would fail spectacularly. This was not simply about preventing insurance fraud, but about proving that his manipulation techniques had ultimately made me stronger rather than more vulnerable. The same trust and devotion he had exploited would become the foundation for a methodical response that would demonstrate my true capabilities. My professional network at Meridian Investment Group provided additional resources for understanding Marcus's scheme and developing countermeasures. Without revealing the personal nature of my situation, I consulted with colleagues who specialized in insurance fraud detection, identity verification, and criminal financial investigations. Their insights helped me recognize the sophisticated nature of Marcus's planning, while identifying weaknesses in his approach that I could exploit. The most valuable professional consultation came from Rebecca Chen, a former colleague who now worked for the Illinois Department of Insurance, investigating fraudulent claims. Rebecca's expertise in insurance fraud patterns helped me understand that Marcus's scheme followed a recognizable template that had been attempted by other perpetrators with varying degrees of success. More importantly, she provided insights about evidence collection and documentation that would be valuable for ensuring prosecution. Diana, the cases that result in successful prosecution always involve comprehensive documentation of the perpetrator's planning process, Rebecca explained during a lunch meeting that I had arranged under the pretense of professional networking. Insurance companies and law enforcement agencies need clear evidence of intent, sophisticated planning, and the specific methods used to execute the fraud. Without that documentation, even obvious fraud attempts can be difficult to prosecute effectively. Rebecca's guidance helped me refine my evidence collection procedures to ensure that everything I gathered would meet legal standards for admissibility and effectiveness. Her insights also helped me understand the timeline for insurance fraud prosecution, which suggested that I would need to prevent Marcus's scheme from succeeding, while ensuring that his attempted fraud would result in criminal charges rather than simply administrative consequences. The investigation phase also revealed that Marcus had been receiving assistance from Vincent Torino, the private investigator whose communications I had discovered in Marcus's email accounts. Additional research into Torino's background revealed a pattern of involvement in questionable activities, including identity documentation, surveillance services, and consultation for individuals seeking to avoid legal obligations or change their circumstances without proper legal procedures. Torino's involvement suggested that Marcus's scheme was more sophisticated than simple insurance fraud, potentially involving false identity creation, relocation assistance, and ongoing support for maintaining a new life under assumed circumstances. This complexity indicated that Marcus had been planning his betrayal for an extended period and had invested considerable resources in ensuring that his scheme would succeed while avoiding detection or prosecution. The revelation that Marcus had been working with professional accomplices to plan my abandonment created additional emotional devastation, while simultaneously providing more evidence for eventual prosecution. Torino's involvement meant that Marcus's scheme represented conspiracy rather than individual fraud, potentially resulting in more serious criminal charges and longer prison sentences if prosecution was successful. My investigation also revealed that Marcus had been conducting test runs of his deception techniques, practicing false health emergencies and medical documentation procedures that would support his eventual fake death claim. These practice sessions had been conducted when I was traveling for business or attending professional conferences, allowing him to refine his methods without my awareness. The discovery of these practice sessions provided crucial insight into Marcus's timeline and methodology, while creating opportunities for me to anticipate his actual fraud attempt. His pattern of preparation suggested that he was planning to implement his scheme during a period when I would be away from home for an extended period, allowing him to stage his fake death and disappear before I could investigate the circumstances or challenge the insurance claim. This intelligence allowed me to begin preparing countermeasures that would ensure I would be present and prepared when Marcus attempted to execute his fraud. Rather than allowing him to control the timing and circumstances of his scheme, I would position myself to observe his activities and document his fraud attempt in real time. The student would become the teacher, and the victim would become the investigator who exposed the perpetrator. By the end of my first month of systematic investigation, I had accumulated evidence that would prevent Marcus's insurance fraud, while ensuring his prosecution for conspiracy, financial fraud, and identity theft. More importantly, I had transformed from a trusting wife who had been manipulated and deceived into a determined investigator who was prepared to demonstrate the consequences of underestimating someone's intelligence and capabilities. The woman Marcus thought he was betraying no longer existed, replaced by someone who understood the true nature of manipulation and possessed the skills and determination necessary to ensure that betrayal would result in accountability rather than success. His scheme would indeed result in a death, but it would be the death of his freedom and his ability to exploit others rather than the death of the woman he had underestimated so completely. The complexity of conducting covert surveillance on my own husband, while maintaining normal domestic routines, presented challenges that my professional training had not prepared me to handle. Unlike corporate fraud investigations where I could maintain objective distance from the subjects, this situation required me to share meals, conversations, and intimate moments with someone I was actively investigating for planned betrayal. The psychological strain of this double existence tested my emotional resilience in ways that forced me to develop entirely new coping mechanisms. The first major challenge emerged when Marcus began implementing what appeared to be the preliminary phases of his scheme. During the second week of April, he initiated a series of activities that seemed designed to establish documentation for his planned disappearance, while testing my awareness of his unusual behavior. These activities included scheduling multiple medical appointments for vague symptoms, researching wilderness hiking areas in remote locations, and increasing his life insurance policy reviews under the pretense of routine financial planning. Marcus's medical appointment strategy revealed sophisticated understanding of insurance claim procedures and the documentation required to support suspicious death claims. He scheduled consultations with specialists for chest pain, shortness of breath, and fatigue symptoms that would suggest underlying cardiovascular concerns. However, his descriptions of these symptoms to me were inconsistent with the detailed accounts he provided to medical professionals, indicating that he was deliberately creating false medical records to support future insurance claims. The hiking research presented a more immediate concern, because it suggested Marcus was identifying locations where he could stage his disappearance in ways that would make body recovery difficult or impossible. His internet search history revealed extensive investigation of wilderness areas in Colorado, Montana, and Wyoming where hiking accidents were common and search and rescue operations often failed to locate missing persons. This research indicated that Marcus was planning to disappear in circumstances that would allow him to be declared dead, without producing physical evidence that could contradict his false death claim. Monitoring these activities while maintaining normal household interactions required developing acting abilities I had never needed in my professional or personal life. I had to express appropriate concern about his medical appointments, without revealing my knowledge that his symptoms were fabricated. I needed to show interest in his hiking research without indicating my understanding of its true purpose. Most challenging, I had to continue sharing physical and emotional intimacy with someone who was actively planning to abandon and financially destroy me. The emotional toll of this deception became evident during our conversations about future plans and shared goals. Marcus would discuss retirement savings, vacation destinations, and home improvement projects with apparent sincerity, while simultaneously implementing a scheme that would make all such plans impossible. His ability to maintain emotional authenticity while planning betrayal revealed a level of psychological sophistication that forced me to reconsider everything I thought I understood about his character and our relationship. My professional background provided frameworks for analyzing Marcus's behavior patterns, but it did not prepare me for the personal devastation of recognizing manipulation techniques that had shaped our entire marriage. The same skills that made me effective at detecting corporate fraud also made me increasingly aware of how Marcus had been conditioning my responses and limiting my autonomy throughout our relationship. Each new insight about his current scheme revealed additional layers of historical manipulation that had been invisible to me until I began viewing our relationship through an investigative lens. The discovery process forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my own contributions to the dynamic that had made Marcus's manipulation possible. My focus on career advancement had created opportunities for him to manage household finances without oversight. My trust in his explanations for unusual activities had discouraged me from asking probing questions or seeking independent verification. My desire to maintain domestic harmony had led me to accept his decisions about social activities and financial planning without asserting my own preferences or judgment. This self-reflection created an additional challenge because it required processing my own role in enabling Marcus's deception while maintaining the focus and objectivity needed to gather evidence about his current scheme. The temptation to blame myself for being naive or inattentive threatened to undermine my confidence in conducting the investigation effectively. However, my professional experience with fraud victims had taught me that self-blame often reflects the manipulator's conditioning rather than the victim's actual failings. The realization that Marcus had been systematically conditioning my responses to discourage independent investigation created anger that initially threatened to compromise my investigative objectivity. However, this anger also provided motivation for ensuring that his scheme would fail completely, while establishing accountability for both his current fraud attempt and his years of financial manipulation. The same emotional investment that made the investigation personally difficult also ensured that I would be thorough and persistent in gathering evidence. My approach to evidence collection evolved as I gained experience with covert surveillance and document acquisition. Initially, I had been cautious about accessing Marcus's personal communications and financial records, concerned about legal implications and ethical boundaries. However, consultation with Rebecca Chen and other professional contacts clarified that gathering evidence of ongoing criminal activity was not only legally permissible, but ethically necessary to prevent fraud and protect potential victims. The technical aspects of monitoring Marcus's communications required developing skills that my financial analysis background had not provided. I learned to access deleted email files, recover internet browsing history, and monitor phone communications without leaving digital traces that could alert Marcus to my surveillance. These technical competencies represented a significant expansion of my investigative capabilities, while providing access to evidence that would be crucial for preventing his fraud attempt. Marcus's communications with Vincent Torino revealed the timeline and methodology for his planned disappearance in detail that exceeded my initial estimates of his scheme's sophistication. Their exchanges discussed specific procedures for creating false identity documents, establishing new financial accounts under assumed names, and maintaining secure communication channels that would allow Marcus to access insurance payouts without revealing his survival. The conspiracy involved professional services that would enable Marcus to build an entirely new life, while leaving me to manage the legal and financial consequences of his supposed death. The most devastating discovery was Marcus's discussion of contingency plans for handling my potential investigation of his disappearance. Torino had advised him about methods for discrediting my credibility with insurance investigators, creating false evidence that would suggest my involvement in his supposed death, and establishing documentation that would make me appear financially motivated to harm him. These discussions revealed that Marcus viewed me not only as a victim to be exploited, but as a potential threat to be neutralized if I became problematic for his scheme. The contingency planning discussions forced me to recognize that my investigation needed to include protective measures for my own legal and financial security. Marcus and Torino were preparing to frame me as a suspect in his fake death if my behavior suggested that I had discovered their scheme. This awareness transformed my evidence collection from a simple fraud prevention effort into a comprehensive self-defense strategy that would need to protect me from both financial exploitation and criminal accusations. The psychological impact of learning that Marcus was prepared to destroy my reputation and potentially my freedom to protect his fraud scheme created a level of betrayal that exceeded even my initial shock about his insurance fraud plans. This was not simply about collecting money and disappearing, but about ensuring that I would be unable to challenge his actions or rebuild my life after his betrayal. The cruelty and calculation involved in these contingency plans revealed a level of malice that made me question how I had been so completely deceived about his character. However, Marcus's detailed planning also created opportunities for me to anticipate and counter his strategies while gathering evidence that would ensure his prosecution rather than allowing him to escape accountability. His communications with Torino provided insight into their specific methods and timeline that would allow me to position myself to document their fraud attempt in real time. The same thorough preparation that Marcus believed would ensure his success would actually provide the evidence needed for his conviction. The investigation process was transforming my understanding of my own capabilities while revealing strengths and competencies that I had never been required to develop during my conventional career in marriage. The analytical skills that served me well in financial fraud detection were proving equally valuable for personal protection and criminal investigation. More importantly, the emotional resilience required to maintain my investigation while processing profound betrayal was developing confidence and determination that would serve me well beyond this immediate crisis. My professional network was providing resources and support that demonstrated the value of maintaining independent relationships, despite Marcus's efforts to isolate me socially and professionally. Colleagues who had seemed like casual acquaintances were proving willing to offer expertise and assistance that was crucial for my investigation. These relationships were revealing social capital that I had accumulated through competent professional performance, but had never needed to access for personal protection. The contrast between Marcus's manipulative relationship style and the genuine support I was receiving from professional contacts highlighted the difference between authentic connection and exploitative manipulation. The people who were helping me expected nothing in return except the satisfaction of supporting a colleague in difficulty. Marcus's assistance had always been contingent on maintaining control and extracting benefit from our relationship. This comparison was teaching me to recognize healthy relationship dynamics while appreciating the network of genuine support that existed outside my marriage. By the end of April, my investigation had evolved from simple evidence gathering into comprehensive preparation for a confrontation that would determine the trajectory of both our lives. Marcus's scheme was progressing according to a timeline that would culminate in his staged disappearance during the first week of May, when I was scheduled to attend a professional conference in Denver. His plan assumed that my absence would provide the time and cover needed to implement his fake death while establishing an alibi that would support his insurance claim. The knowledge of his timeline allowed me to begin preparing countermeasures that would ensure his scheme would fail while providing maximum exposure of his criminal activities. Rather than allowing Marcus to control the circumstances of his fraud attempt, I would position myself to observe and document his activities, while ensuring that his betrayal would result in immediate accountability rather than successful escape. The unexpected assistance came from Detective Angela Martinez of the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, who contacted me during the first week of May through a referral from Rebecca Chen. Detective Martinez explained that Vincent Torino had been under surveillance for several months as part of a broader investigation into organized insurance fraud activities, and my husband's name had appeared frequently in communications that suggested ongoing criminal conspiracy. Mrs. Castellano, we have been monitoring Torino's activities as part of Operation Clean Slate, a multi-agency investigation targeting sophisticated insurance fraud networks operating throughout the Midwest, Detective Martinez explained during our initial phone conversation. Your husband appears to be planning an insurance fraud attempt that fits patterns we have been tracking for over 18 months. The revelation that Marcus's scheme was part of a larger criminal network rather than an isolated fraud attempt created both relief and additional concern about the complexity of the situation I was navigating. Relief came from learning that professional law enforcement was already investigating the conspiracy, which meant my evidence-gathering efforts could contribute to a prosecution that was already being developed. Concern arose from understanding that Marcus was involved with organized criminal activities that extended beyond simple insurance fraud. Detective Martinez's offer of cooperation represented validation that my investigation had been proceeding along appropriate lines, while providing access to law enforcement resources that could ensure Marcus's scheme would fail completely. However, the detective also explained that successful prosecution of the broader conspiracy required careful coordination to avoid alerting the subjects that they were under surveillance until sufficient evidence had been gathered to ensure convictions for all participants. Your husband's fraud attempt represents an opportunity to document the network's methods and gather evidence about their broader operations, Detective Martinez continued. However, we need to ensure that our intervention does not compromise the larger investigation or allow other conspirators to escape prosecution by modifying their activities. The collaborative approach Detective Martinez proposed would allow me to continue my evidence gathering while ensuring that law enforcement would be positioned to prevent Marcus's fraud attempt and arrest all participants when they attempted to execute their scheme. This coordination would require precise timing and communication to ensure that my safety was protected while maximizing the prosecution potential for all criminal activities involved. The professional validation that came from Detective Martinez's recognition of my investigative work created confidence that extended beyond the immediate situation with Marcus. My systematic approach to evidence gathering had produced documentation that law enforcement professionals considered valuable for criminal prosecution. The analytical skills I had developed through corporate fraud detection were proving applicable to criminal investigation in ways that demonstrated capabilities I had never fully recognized. Detective Martinez arranged a comprehensive briefing that revealed the scope of the criminal network Marcus had become involved with and the sophisticated nature of their operations. Torino's organization specialized in providing complete identity change services for individuals seeking to escape legal obligations, financial responsibilities, or personal relationships. Their clients included people facing bankruptcy, criminal prosecution, civil litigation, and domestic situations they wished to abandon without proper legal procedures. The network's insurance fraud component involved elaborate staging of accidents, deaths, and disappearances that would generate substantial payouts, while allowing the supposed victims to assume new identities and relocate to areas where they could rebuild their lives with financial resources obtained through deception. Marcus's scheme represented a standard template that had been successfully implemented dozens of times over the previous several years. The sophistication of these operations requires extensive planning, professional documentation services, and ongoing support for maintaining false identities, Detective Martinez explained. Torino's network has connections with corrupt medical professionals, document forgers, and financial institutions that facilitate every aspect of the identity change process. The briefing revealed that Marcus's scheme would involve staging a hiking accident in a remote Colorado wilderness area where Torino's associates had previously conducted similar operations. The location had been selected because of its history of legitimate hiking accidents, limited search and rescue capabilities, and terrain that would make body recovery difficult or impossible. Marcus would disappear during what appeared to be a solo hiking expedition, leaving behind evidence suggesting accidental death while actually being transported to a safe location where he could assume his new identity. The insurance claim process would be supported by documentation that Torino's medical contacts had created, establishing a pattern of cardiovascular symptoms that would make accidental death during strenuous hiking activity appear medically plausible. The claim would be filed after a reasonable search period had failed to locate Marcus's body, with the assumption that I would cooperate with the process as a grieving widow seeking financial security after my husband's tragic accident. Learning the specific details of Marcus's planned betrayal created emotional devastation that was compounded by recognition of how thoroughly he had calculated my expected responses to his disappearance. His scheme assumed that I would accept his death as genuine, file the insurance claim as directed, and use the proceeds to manage the debt obligations he had created. The plan relied on my trust, grief, and financial desperation to ensure that I would unknowingly facilitate his fraud while becoming legally liable for any consequences if the scheme were later exposed. The realization that Marcus had been studying my psychological patterns and financial situation to design a fraud that would exploit my expected emotional responses revealed a level of calculated manipulation that exceeded even my growing understanding of his true character. This was not simply about collecting insurance money, but about ensuring that I would be psychologically and financially trapped in ways that would prevent me from investigating his disappearance or challenging the circumstances of his supposed death. Detective Martinez's explanation of how the network typically handled potential complications provided insight into the contingency plans Marcus and Torino had discussed in their communications. If spouses or other family members became suspicious about the circumstances of a client's disappearance, the network had procedures for discrediting their concerns, creating false evidence that suggested alternative explanations for suspicious behavior, and, if necessary, framing skeptical family members as suspects in the supposed victim's death. These organizations understand that successful insurance fraud requires managing all potential sources of exposure, Detective Martinez warned. They are prepared to sacrifice clients' family members to protect their operations if those family members pose threats to the success of their schemes. The warning confirmed my earlier assessment that Marcus was prepared to destroy my life to protect his fraud attempt, but it also provided crucial intelligence about the methods he might use if he became aware of my investigation. The network's experience with suspicious family members had taught them to monitor communications, plant false evidence, and manipulate law enforcement investigations in ways that could transform victims into suspects. This knowledge forced me to recognize that my investigation needed to include protective measures that would ensure my safety and legal security regardless of how Marcus's scheme unfolded. Detective Martinez's involvement provided law enforcement protection, but it also required accepting that my role in the investigation would need to be carefully managed to avoid compromising the broader prosecution, while ensuring my personal protection. The collaborative relationship with Detective Martinez also revealed aspects of criminal investigation that my corporate fraud experience had not prepared me to understand. The timeline for building criminal cases required patience and strategic thinking that extended beyond simply preventing individual fraud attempts. Successful prosecution of criminal networks required gathering evidence about multiple participants, documenting their methods comprehensively, and coordinating arrests to prevent escape or evidence destruction. Your husband's case represents one component of a larger investigation that will ultimately dismantle an organization that has defrauded insurance companies of millions of dollars while destroying the lives of family members who were abandoned or framed by their clients, Detective Martinez explained. Your cooperation allows us to gather evidence that will ensure justice for multiple victims while preventing future fraud attempts. The opportunity to contribute to justice that extended beyond my personal situation created motivation that helped me process the emotional trauma of Marcus's betrayal while maintaining focus on the investigation objectives. This was not simply about protecting myself from financial exploitation, but about ensuring accountability for a criminal organization that had victimized numerous families through elaborate deception and manipulation. Detective Martinez's professional approach to the investigation provided a framework for channeling my anger and determination into constructive action that would serve broader justice objectives while protecting my personal interests. The detective's recognition of my analytical capabilities and investigative instincts created confidence that extended beyond the immediate situation with Marcus. The collaboration also provided access to law enforcement resources that would ensure Marcus's scheme would fail completely while generating evidence for his prosecution. Surveillance capabilities, communication monitoring, and coordination with insurance investigators would create comprehensive documentation of the fraud attempt that would be impossible for Marcus or his attorneys to challenge or minimize. Most importantly, Detective Martinez's involvement meant that I would not have to confront Marcus alone or rely solely on my own resources to ensure that his betrayal would result in appropriate consequences. The emotional support of knowing that professional investigators understood the complexity of my situation and respected my contributions to the evidence-gathering process provided psychological foundation for maintaining my investigation while processing the trauma of discovering Marcus's true character. The partnership with law enforcement also created opportunities for me to develop investigative capabilities that would serve me well beyond the immediate crisis with Marcus. Detective Martinez was willing to provide guidance about evidence collection, surveillance techniques, and personal protection that represented valuable skills for anyone navigating complex personal or professional challenges. Your background in financial analysis provides excellent preparation for criminal investigation work, Detective Martinez observed. The same analytical thinking that makes you effective at detecting corporate fraud is valuable for understanding criminal behavior patterns and developing strategies for gathering evidence about illegal activities. The professional validation from someone with extensive criminal investigation experience created confidence about my capabilities that extended far beyond my corporate fraud detection background. This experience was revealing competencies and interests that I had never explored, because my conventional career path had not required developing these skills. The acceleration of Marcus's preparatory activities during the second week of May provided clear indicators that his fraud scheme was approaching implementation phase. His behavior patterns shifted from careful planning to active execution, creating opportunities for me to observe his methods while confirming the timeline Detective Martinez and I had anticipated. The most significant warning sign emerged when Marcus announced his intention to take a solo hiking expedition to Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park, scheduled to coincide with my planned business conference in Denver. Marcus's announcement came during dinner on Tuesday evening, presented with the casual enthusiasm of someone sharing exciting recreational plans rather than implementing a criminal conspiracy. His explanation emphasized his need for solitude and physical challenge to address work-related stress and clarify his thinking about our future together. The irony of his language, which accurately described his situation while completely misrepresenting his intentions, demonstrated the sophisticated manipulation techniques that had characterized our entire relationship. Diana, I have been feeling overwhelmed by the consulting work pressures lately, and I think some time alone in the wilderness would help me gain perspective on our priorities and goals, Marcus explained with apparent sincerity. The timing works perfectly with your Denver conference, so we can both focus on our individual needs without feeling guilty about time apart. The presentation was masterfully calculated to address potential concerns while establishing plausible explanations for his absence and inability to maintain regular communication. Marcus emphasized his experience with wilderness hiking, his preparation for challenging terrain, and his excitement about photography opportunities that would justify carrying equipment that could support his actual escape plan. Every element of his explanation served multiple purposes, creating legitimate cover for criminal activities while maintaining the emotional authenticity that had made his manipulation effective throughout our marriage. My response required extraordinary emotional discipline to express appropriate concern about his solo hiking plans without revealing my knowledge of their true purpose. I needed to ask reasonable questions about his safety preparations and itinerary without appearing suspicious about details that would be irrelevant for legitimate hiking activities. The conversation demanded performance skills that tested my ability to maintain the deception that was now protecting both my investigation and my safety. That sounds like exactly what you need, Marcus. Have you planned your specific route and timeline? I want to know your schedule so I will not worry if communication is limited in remote areas, I replied, establishing reasonable expectations for contact while gathering intelligence about his actual plans. Marcus's response revealed both his preparation and his underestimation of my analytical capabilities. He provided detailed information about hiking routes, camping locations, and expected timeline that appeared thoroughly researched and realistic. However, the specificity of his itinerary also provided information that Detective Martinez could use to position surveillance and intervention resources. Marcus's desire to appear prepared and responsible was creating documentation that would facilitate his eventual arrest. The hiking equipment Marcus began acquiring provided additional confirmation that his scheme was progressing according to Detective Martinez's predictions. His purchases included specialized gear for high-altitude wilderness survival, emergency communication devices, and photography equipment that exceeded the requirements for recreational hiking. More significantly, he acquired items that suggested he was preparing for activities that would require concealing his identity or surviving independently for extended periods. The most revealing purchase was a comprehensive first aid kit that included supplies for treating serious injuries and medications that would support extended medical treatment without professional assistance. These items suggested that Marcus was preparing for scenarios that could involve genuine physical danger or the need to simulate injury or illness as part of his disappearance staging. The medical supplies also indicated that his scheme might involve more complex deception than simply disappearing during a hiking accident. Marcus's communication patterns during this period provided insight into his coordination with Vincent Torino and other conspirators, while revealing his psychological preparation for abandoning our life together. His phone conversations became more frequent and secretive, often conducted outside our home or during times when he believed I was occupied with work activities. The pattern suggested that final preparations were being coordinated, and contingency plans were being reviewed. The emotional distance Marcus began creating between us represented perhaps the most painful aspect of observing his fraud preparation. His gradual withdrawal from intimate conversation, shared activities, and future planning indicated that he was psychologically severing our relationship in preparation for his disappearance. The man who had shared my bed for 12 years was systematically eliminating emotional connections that might complicate his ability to abandon me without guilt or regret. This emotional withdrawal was conducted with the same calculating precision that characterized all aspects of Marcus's scheme. He maintained enough affection and attention to avoid raising suspicions about relationship problems, while gradually reducing his investment in our shared life. His approach demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how to manipulate emotional relationships while protecting his own psychological comfort during the deception process. The financial preparation Marcus conducted during this period revealed the extent of his planning while providing additional evidence for Detective Martinez's investigation. He systematically liquidated remaining shared assets, transferred funds to accounts I could not access, and created financial obligations that would become my responsibility after his supposed death. These activities represented the final phase of his systematic theft of our joint resources. The most disturbing discovery was Marcus's creation of false documentation that would suggest I had been experiencing financial stress and marital difficulties that could provide motive for harming him. He had been manipulating our joint credit card statements, creating artificial patterns of spending that would appear suspicious to insurance investigators. These documents were designed to support Torino's contingency plans for framing me as a suspect if my behavior suggested awareness of their scheme. The realization that Marcus was actively creating evidence that could be used to incriminate me if his fraud attempt was discovered created fear that went beyond concern about financial exploitation. This was not simply about theft and abandonment, but about ensuring that I would be unable to challenge his actions or rebuild my life after his betrayal. The level of malice involved in these preparations revealed character traits that I had never suspected despite 12 years of marriage. Detective Martinez's surveillance of Torino's activities provided confirmation that Marcus's scheme was progressing according to established patterns, while revealing additional participants in the conspiracy. The network included medical professionals who would provide false documentation about Marcus's supposed death, financial specialists who would assist with the insurance claim process, and transportation coordinators who would facilitate his relocation to a predetermined, safe location. The sophistication of the support network demonstrated why previous fraud attempts using similar methods had been successful despite insurance companies' security measures. The conspiracy involved corrupt professionals in multiple industries who could provide documentation and services that would make the fraud appear legitimate to investigators who were not specifically looking for evidence of deception. Your husband's case represents one of the most comprehensive fraud schemes we have encountered in terms of planning detail and resource coordination, Detective Martinez explained during one of our regular briefings. The network has refined their methods through dozens of previous operations, which makes them extremely effective but also predictable in their approach. The predictability of the network's methods provided advantages for law enforcement intervention while creating opportunities for me to anticipate Marcus's actions and prepare appropriate responses. Detective Martinez's experience with similar cases allowed her to provide guidance about timing, evidence collection, and personal protection that would ensure my safety, while maximizing prosecution potential. The psychological impact of observing Marcus's final preparations while maintaining normal household routines created stress that tested my emotional resilience in unprecedented ways. I was required to continue cooking meals, having conversations, and sharing physical intimacy with someone who was actively planning to destroy my life. The cognitive dissonance between his apparent affection and his actual intentions created mental strain that threatened to overwhelm my ability to maintain the investigation effectively. However, the systematic nature of my evidence collection provided psychological anchor that helped me process the emotional trauma while maintaining focus on investigative objectives. Each piece of evidence I gathered represented progress toward ensuring that Marcus's betrayal would result in accountability rather than successful escape. The investigation became a form of therapy that channeled my anger and hurt into constructive action. The professional validation I continued to receive from Detective Martinez and her colleagues provided confidence that extended beyond the immediate situation with Marcus. Law enforcement professionals recognized my analytical capabilities and investigative instincts as valuable contributions to criminal investigation. This recognition was building self-assurance that would serve me well regardless of how the current crisis resolved. The contrast between Marcus's manipulative relationship style and the authentic professional relationships I was developing through the investigation highlighted differences between exploitative and supportive human connections. Detective Martinez and her colleagues expected nothing from me except competent participation in legitimate law enforcement activities. Their support was based on mutual respect rather than control and manipulation. My preparation for Marcus's fraud attempt also required developing emotional readiness for the confrontation that would ultimately expose his scheme and end our marriage. The accumulation of evidence about his betrayal was creating psychological distance that would allow me to act decisively when the time came to prevent his fraud and ensure his prosecution. The woman he thought he was deceiving was being replaced by someone who understood manipulation techniques and possessed the determination to ensure accountability. The final warning sign came when Marcus began displaying nervous excitement that suggested his scheme was approaching implementation. His behavior combined anticipation about his upcoming hiking expedition with underlying anxiety about executing complex criminal activities. The emotional tension he was experiencing provided confirmation that his fraud attempt would occur according to the timeline Detective Martinez and I had predicted. By the third week of May, all indicators suggested that Marcus would implement his disappearance scheme during the final week of the month, when I was scheduled to be attending my professional conference in Denver. His assumption that my absence would provide cover for his activities would instead ensure that I would be positioned to observe and document his fraud attempt, while law enforcement resources were prepared to intervene at the optimal moment for gathering evidence and ensuring prosecution. The comprehensive scope of Marcus's deception became fully apparent during the final week of May, when Detective Martinez's surveillance operation captured communications that revealed the complete timeline and methodology for his fraud scheme. The intercepted conversations between Marcus and Vincent Torino documented not only the specific procedures for staging his disappearance, but also the extensive preparation that had been conducted to ensure my cooperation with the insurance claim process and my inability to challenge the circumstances of his supposed death. The revelation that emerged from these communications exceeded even my growing understanding of Marcus's calculated betrayal. His scheme involved not only faking his death and collecting insurance money, but also ensuring that I would be psychologically and financially destroyed in ways that would prevent me from investigating his disappearance or rebuilding my life independently. The level of systematic cruelty embedded in his planning demonstrated malice that went far beyond simple financial fraud. Detective Martinez arranged an emergency briefing to share the intercepted communications and discuss immediate protective measures that would be necessary to ensure my safety during the final implementation phase of Marcus's scheme. The briefing revealed that Torino's organization had been monitoring my activities for several weeks to ensure that I had not discovered their plans and to gather intelligence that could be used to manipulate my responses to Marcus's disappearance. Mrs. Castellano, the surveillance your husband authorized represents a serious escalation in the threat level you are facing, Detective Martinez explained with unusual gravity. Torino's people have been documenting your daily routines, professional activities, and personal relationships to ensure that they can predict and control your behavior after your husband's supposed death. The knowledge that professional criminals had been observing my movements while I conducted my own investigation created fear that was compounded by recognition of how vulnerable I had been despite my careful preparation. My assumption that I was conducting covert surveillance of Marcus had been incorrect. The conspiracy had been monitoring both of us while allowing me to believe that my investigation was proceeding undetected. The intercepted communications revealed specific plans for manipulating my emotional state and decision-making process following Marcus's staged disappearance. Torino's organization had developed psychological profiles based on their surveillance that would guide their approach to ensuring my cooperation with the insurance claim while preventing me from conducting independent investigation of the circumstances surrounding his supposed death. The manipulation strategy involved creating artificial time pressure that would force me to file insurance claims quickly without thorough investigation, providing false emotional support through planted contacts who would discourage skeptical thinking, and if necessary, creating manufactured evidence that would suggest alternative explanations for any suspicious circumstances I might identify. The sophistication of these psychological manipulation techniques demonstrated professional expertise in exploiting grief and confusion to achieve criminal objectives. The most disturbing aspect of the communications was Marcus's detailed discussion of my psychological vulnerabilities and the specific manipulation techniques that had proven effective throughout our marriage. He provided Torino's organization with intimate knowledge about my insecurities, emotional triggers, and decision-making patterns that could be exploited to ensure my compliance with their objectives. The conversations revealed that Marcus had been systematically studying my psychological responses for years to develop strategies for controlling my behavior. Your husband has provided extensive psychological analysis that demonstrates sophisticated understanding of manipulation techniques, Detective Martinez explained while reviewing transcripts of the intercepted communications. He has been conditioning your responses throughout your marriage to ensure that you would react predictably to his disappearance and follow the course of action that would benefit his fraud scheme. The realization that every aspect of our relationship had been calculated to prepare me for exploitation created emotional devastation that threatened to overwhelm my ability to process the information objectively. Marcus had not simply planned to betray me, but had been systematically grooming me for betrayal throughout our entire marriage. Every expression of love, every shared experience, and every intimate conversation had been contaminated by his strategic planning for eventual abandonment and exploitation. The intercepted communications also revealed contingency plans for handling my potential non-cooperation with the insurance claim process, or any indication that I suspected the circumstances of Marcus's disappearance. These plans included strategies for discrediting my mental stability, creating false evidence that would suggest my involvement in his supposed death, and, if necessary, eliminating me as a threat to their operation through methods that would appear accidental or self-inflicted. The contingency planning discussions documented Marcus's willingness to authorize violence against me if I became problematic for his fraud scheme. The conversations revealed that he viewed me not as a human being deserving protection, but as a potential obstacle to be managed through whatever means proved necessary to ensure his successful escape and financial gain. The level of dehumanization embedded in these discussions exceeded even the most pessimistic assessments I had developed about his character. Detective Martinez's analysis of the intercepted communications provided crucial intelligence about the timeline and methodology for Marcus's planned disappearance, while revealing opportunities for law enforcement intervention that would ensure comprehensive evidence collection and successful prosecution of all participants. The communications had documented the conspiracy so thoroughly that conviction would be virtually certain if the evidence could be properly preserved and presented. The arrogance of these criminals in discussing their methods so explicitly provides us with exactly the evidence needed to ensure successful prosecution, Detective Martinez observed. Your husband and his associates have essentially provided complete documentation of their criminal conspiracy while believing that their communications were secure from law enforcement monitoring. The professional confidence Detective Martinez expressed about prosecution potential provided psychological foundation for processing the emotional trauma of discovering the full extent of Marcus's betrayal. The evidence gathered through our collaborative investigation would ensure that his cruel manipulation would result in appropriate legal consequences rather than successful escape and continued exploitation of other victims. The intercepted communications also revealed information about previous fraud schemes conducted by Torino's organization and the fate of family members who had been abandoned by clients who utilized their services. The pattern revealed that Marcus's treatment of me was consistent with standard operating procedures that had been refined through numerous previous operations. The organization specialized in helping clients abandon family obligations while ensuring that abandoned family members would be unable to challenge their actions or seek accountability. The documentation of previous cases provided insight into the long-term consequences that Marcus had planned for me while demonstrating the systematic nature of the organization's criminal activities. Family members who had been abandoned through similar schemes had experienced financial devastation, legal complications, and psychological trauma that had destroyed their ability to rebuild their lives independently. Marcus had been planning to inflict this suffering deliberately, while believing that he would escape all consequences for his actions. However, the comprehensive documentation of the conspiracy also provided opportunities for justice that extended beyond my individual situation. The evidence gathered through our investigation would enable law enforcement to prosecute not only Marcus and Torino, but also the network of corrupt professionals who had supported multiple fraud schemes over several years. The case would result in accountability for systematic criminal activities that had victimized numerous families. The revelation of the full scope of Marcus's manipulation created anger that initially threatened to compromise my emotional stability and investigative objectivity. The recognition that our entire marriage had been a calculated deception designed to prepare me for eventual exploitation challenged fundamental assumptions about human relationships and personal judgment that had guided my life for decades. However, the systematic nature of the evidence collection process provided framework for channeling this anger into determination to ensure that Marcus's scheme would fail completely while contributing to broader justice objectives. The same analytical skills that had enabled me to uncover his deception would ensure that his manipulation would result in comprehensive accountability rather than successful exploitation. The professional validation I received from Detective Martinez and her colleagues helped me recognize that Marcus's manipulation reflected sophisticated criminal expertise, rather than personal failings in my judgment or awareness. The techniques he had employed were designed by professionals who specialized in exploiting trust and affection for criminal purposes. My recognition of the deception and successful evidence collection demonstrated competence rather than naivete. Your analytical capabilities and investigative instincts have been crucial for exposing this conspiracy, Detective Martinez emphasized. The evidence you gathered independently provided the foundation for our law enforcement investigation, and your continued cooperation will ensure that these criminals face appropriate consequences for their actions. The recognition that my professional skills and personal determination had been essential for uncovering and documenting the conspiracy created confidence that would serve me well beyond the immediate crisis with Marcus. The experience was revealing capabilities and strengths that I had never been required to develop through conventional career and personal challenges. The complete revelation of Marcus's manipulation also provided clarity about the path forward and the decisions that would be necessary to ensure my protection and his accountability. The evidence-gathering phase of my investigation was complete. The time had arrived for direct action that would prevent his fraud scheme while ensuring that his betrayal would result in immediate and comprehensive consequences. The woman Marcus thought he had been manipulating and preparing for exploitation no longer existed. Replaced by someone who understood criminal manipulation techniques and possessed the determination and resources necessary to ensure that his cruelty would be met with decisive action and appropriate justice. The weight of discovering that my entire marriage had been an elaborate preparation for betrayal created psychological isolation that was more profound than any physical separation could have produced. Despite Detective Martinez's professional support and the validation of my investigative capabilities, the fundamental questions about my judgment and perception of reality threatened to undermine my confidence in continuing the mission to expose Marcus's fraud scheme. The revelation that every intimate moment, every shared decision, and every expression of love had been calculated manipulation forced me to confront the possibility that I had been living in a fabricated reality for 12 years. The most devastating aspect of this realization was not simply the betrayal itself, but the recognition that my professional expertise in detecting financial fraud had provided no protection against personal manipulation. The same analytical skills that had made me successful at identifying corporate deception had been systematically neutralized by someone who understood my psychological vulnerabilities and had invested years in exploiting them. This contradiction between professional competence and personal victimization created cognitive dissonance that challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence, awareness, and self-protection. The isolation was compounded by the necessity of maintaining absolute secrecy about the investigation, while continuing to interact with Marcus as if nothing had changed. Detective Martinez had emphasized that any alteration in my behavior patterns could alert the conspiracy to law enforcement involvement and compromise both the evidence collection process and my personal safety. However, the psychological effort required to maintain normal household routines while processing the knowledge of systematic betrayal was creating stress that threatened my emotional stability and professional functioning. During the Memorial Day weekend, as Marcus finalized his preparations for the Colorado hiking expedition that would serve as cover for his staged disappearance, I found myself questioning every aspect of my perception and judgment. The man who was preparing our final meals together, discussing routine household maintenance, and expressing concern about my upcoming business conference, was simultaneously coordinating criminal activities designed to destroy my life. The disconnect between his apparent normalcy and his actual intentions created doubt about my ability to assess reality accurately. The self-doubt was particularly destructive because it undermined the confidence and determination that had sustained me through months of covert investigation. If I had been so completely deceived about the fundamental nature of my marriage, how could I trust my assessment of evidence, my strategic planning, or my ability to work effectively with law enforcement? The questioning extended beyond the immediate situation with Marcus to encompass broader concerns about my competence and reliability in all areas of life. The professional implications of this self-doubt were especially troubling because my career at Meridian Investment Group required making complex analytical decisions that affected client financial security and regulatory compliance. The knowledge that I had been manipulated so thoroughly in my personal life created anxiety about whether my professional judgment was equally compromised. The fear that my analytical capabilities might be fundamentally flawed threatened not only my current investigation but also my long-term career prospects and financial independence. The isolation was intensified by my inability to seek support from friends, family members, or professional counselors who might normally provide perspective and emotional guidance during crisis situations. The sensitive nature of the ongoing criminal investigation required maintaining complete confidentiality about Marcus's scheme and my cooperation with law enforcement. This secrecy prevented me from accessing the social support networks that would typically help process trauma and maintain psychological equilibrium during extreme stress. The social isolation was particularly difficult because Marcus had systematically limited my independent relationships throughout our marriage, creating dependence on him for emotional support and social connection. The recognition that this isolation had been deliberately engineered to increase my vulnerability to his manipulation added another layer of anger and self-recrimination to the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. The few friendships that had survived his subtle interference were not close enough to provide the level of support needed for processing systematic betrayal and planning complex countermeasures. Detective Martinez recognized the psychological challenges I was facing and arranged for consultation with Dr. Sarah Hoffman, a forensic psychologist who specialized in supporting victims of sophisticated manipulation and fraud schemes. Dr. Hoffman's expertise in trauma recovery and criminal psychology provided professional framework for understanding the emotional impact of systematic deception, while maintaining the psychological stability necessary for continued cooperation with the investigation. Mrs. Castellano, the manipulation techniques your husband employed represent professional-level psychological exploitation that would be effective against intelligent, educated individuals, regardless of their awareness or analytical capabilities, Dr. Hoffman explained during our initial consultation. The systematic nature of his conditioning and the duration of his manipulation created psychological vulnerabilities that even experienced mental health professionals might not recognize in their own relationships. Dr. Hoffman's analysis helped me understand that Marcus's manipulation had been designed by experts who understood how to exploit normal human psychological processes, particularly the tendency to trust intimate partners and interpret their behavior through filters of affection and shared history. The conditioning I had experienced was not evidence of personal weakness or professional incompetence, but demonstration of sophisticated criminal techniques that required specialized knowledge to recognize and resist. The therapeutic consultation provided crucial perspective about the relationship between professional competence and personal vulnerability that helped resolve the cognitive dissonance I was experiencing. Dr. Hoffman explained that financial fraud detection skills, while valuable, were not designed to identify intimate manipulation techniques that exploited emotional connections rather than purely analytical relationships. The expertise required for recognizing personal manipulation was distinct from corporate fraud detection and required different training and awareness. Your analytical capabilities actually represent advantages in recovering from this manipulation because you can apply systematic thinking to understand the techniques that were used against you, Dr. Hoffman observed. The same skills that made you effective at financial analysis will help you process this experience objectively and develop strategies for protecting yourself from future manipulation. The professional validation from both Detective Martinez and Dr. Hoffman helped counteract the self-doubt that was threatening to undermine my effectiveness in the final phases of the investigation. Their recognition of my analytical capabilities and emotional resilience provided external perspective that balanced the internal questioning created by discovering the extent of Marcus's deception. This professional support was crucial for maintaining the psychological stability necessary for executing the confrontation that would expose his fraud scheme. The consultation with Dr. Hoffman also provided strategies for managing the emotional stress of continuing to live with Marcus while knowing about his planned betrayal. The psychological techniques she recommended included compartmentalization methods that would allow me to maintain investigative objectivity while processing personal trauma, stress management approaches that would preserve my emotional stability during high-pressure situations, and self-protection strategies that would help me recognize and resist additional manipulation attempts. The most valuable insight from the therapeutic consultation was understanding that my recognition of Marcus's manipulation and my successful evidence collection demonstrated emotional strength and intellectual capability rather than weakness or failure. The ability to overcome conditioning that had been designed by professionals to be undetectable reflected resilience and competence that would serve me well in rebuilding my life after his prosecution and imprisonment. Dr. Hoffman's analysis also helped me understand the broader implications of my experience for personal growth and future relationships. The systematic manipulation I had survived would provide knowledge about psychological exploitation techniques that would protect me from similar deception in the future. The investigative skills I had developed and the professional relationships I had built would create foundation for independence and success that would be more authentic and sustainable than anything I had experienced during my marriage. The therapeutic support was particularly valuable for processing the anger and sense of violation that accompanied recognition of how thoroughly Marcus had exploited my trust and affection. Dr. Hoffman helped me understand that these emotional responses were normal and appropriate reactions to systematic betrayal, but that channeling them into constructive action would be more beneficial than allowing them to create lasting psychological damage or impair my judgment during the critical final phases of the investigation. The consultation also addressed concerns about my ability to form healthy relationships in the future after experiencing such comprehensive manipulation. Dr. Hoffman explained that survivors of sophisticated manipulation often developed enhanced awareness of deception techniques and improved judgment about relationship dynamics that actually improved their capacity for authentic connection. The experience with Marcus would provide valuable knowledge for recognizing and avoiding exploitative relationships while appreciating genuine partnership and support. The psychological support helped me recognize that the isolation I was experiencing was temporary and artificially created by the investigation requirements, rather than reflecting my actual social capabilities or relationship potential. The professional relationships I had developed with Detective Martinez, Dr. Hoffman, and other law enforcement personnel demonstrated my ability to form authentic connections based on mutual respect and shared objectives, rather than manipulation and control. The most important outcome of the therapeutic consultation was renewed confidence in my ability to complete the investigation successfully while protecting my psychological well-being throughout the process. Dr. Hoffman's analysis confirmed that I possessed the emotional resilience and intellectual capabilities necessary for confronting Marcus effectively, while ensuring that his manipulation would result in appropriate consequences rather than successful exploitation. The professional validation and psychological support provided foundation for moving beyond self-doubt toward decisive action that would demonstrate the transformation from victim to empowered individual capable of ensuring accountability for criminal manipulation. The woman Marcus had spent years conditioning for exploitation was being replaced by someone who understood manipulation techniques and possessed the determination and resources necessary for protecting herself and preventing his fraud scheme from succeeding. The therapeutic foundation provided by Dr. Hoffman enabled me to approach the final preparation phase with strategic clarity that transformed my investigation from reactive evidence gathering into proactive coordination with law enforcement professionals. The psychological support had restored confidence in my analytical capabilities, while providing framework for understanding that my experience represented survival of sophisticated criminal manipulation rather than personal failure. This perspective shift was crucial for developing the professional relationships and strategic alliances that would ensure Marcus's fraud scheme would fail completely while contributing to broader justice objectives. Detective Martinez recognized that the approaching implementation phase of Marcus's scheme required expanded law enforcement coordination that would involve multiple agencies and specialized resources. The case had evolved beyond simple insurance fraud investigation into a complex criminal conspiracy that required expertise in financial crimes, identity fraud, and organized criminal enterprises. This expansion provided opportunities for me to work with additional law enforcement professionals whose specialized knowledge would enhance both my understanding of criminal investigation and my confidence in the prosecution potential. The introduction to Agent Catherine Reynolds from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White Collar Crime Division represented a significant escalation in both the resources dedicated to the case and the recognition of my contributions to the investigation. Agent Reynolds brought federal prosecutorial authority and access to resources that would ensure Marcus and his co-conspirators would face comprehensive charges that reflected the full scope of their criminal activities. Mrs. Castellano, your systematic evidence collection and analytical documentation have provided the foundation for what will become one of the most significant insurance fraud prosecutions in the region, Agent Reynolds explained during our initial briefing. The federal involvement reflects both the interstate nature of the conspiracy and the sophisticated methods that warrant enhanced prosecutorial resources. The federal designation of the case provided validation that extended beyond personal vindication to encompass recognition that my investigation had uncovered criminal activities with broader implications for financial security and consumer protection. The systematic fraud techniques that Marcus and Torino's organization employed represented threats to insurance industry stability and individual financial security that warranted comprehensive federal response. Agent Reynolds introduced me to the broader investigation that had been developing around Torino's organization, revealing the scope of criminal activities that extended far beyond Marcus's individual case. The network had been conducting sophisticated fraud schemes across multiple states, victimizing dozens of families while generating millions of dollars in fraudulent insurance claims. My cooperation was contributing to prosecution efforts that would protect future potential victims while ensuring accountability for systematic criminal exploitation. The federal investigation provided access to resources that confirmed details about Marcus's scheme while revealing additional criminal activities that I had not discovered through my independent investigation. Financial analysis conducted by FBI specialists revealed that Marcus had been involved with Torino's organization for over 2 years, participating in preliminary fraud schemes that had provided training and experience for his planned disappearance. This history demonstrated that his manipulation of our marriage had been more extensive and calculated than even my comprehensive investigation had revealed. The expanded timeline of Marcus's criminal involvement provided crucial perspective about the systematic nature of his deception, while explaining inconsistencies in his behavior that I had noticed but had not been able to interpret accurately. His gradual emotional withdrawal, his increasing secretiveness about professional activities, and his subtle manipulation of our financial situation had been deliberate preparation for criminal activities rather than normal relationship evolution or work-related stress. Agent Reynolds also introduced me to Victoria Chen, a financial analyst with the FBI's Asset Forfeiture Division who specialized in tracing and recovering funds obtained through criminal activities. Victoria's expertise provided hope that the financial damage Marcus had inflicted could be partially recovered, while ensuring that his criminal activities would not generate lasting financial benefit. The systematic nature of your husband's financial manipulation creates opportunities for comprehensive asset recovery that can restore much of the economic damage he has caused, Victoria explained. Federal asset forfeiture procedures allow us to trace and recover funds that were obtained through criminal activities, including money that has been transferred to offshore accounts or converted to other forms of value. The possibility of financial recovery provided practical foundation for rebuilding my life after Marcus's prosecution, while demonstrating that criminal manipulation would not result in lasting economic advantage for perpetrators. The federal resources dedicated to asset recovery reflected recognition that victims of sophisticated fraud deserved comprehensive support for recovery, rather than simply criminal prosecution of their exploiters. The collaboration with federal investigators also provided opportunities to work with Dr. Michael Torres, a forensic accountant who specialized in analyzing complex financial fraud schemes for criminal prosecution purposes. Dr. Torres's expertise complemented my financial analysis background while providing advanced techniques for documenting criminal financial activities that would ensure successful prosecution. Your background in financial analysis provides excellent preparation for understanding complex fraud documentation, but criminal prosecution requires additional evidence standards that ensure convictions will withstand appellate challenges, Dr. Torres explained during our consultation. The systematic approach you have developed can be enhanced with forensic accounting techniques that will strengthen the prosecution case significantly. The professional development opportunities provided through collaboration with federal investigators represented unexpected benefits that would enhance my career prospects while providing skills that would serve me well beyond the immediate situation with Marcus. The experience was revealing capabilities and interests that conventional corporate employment had not allowed me to explore fully. The expanded professional network also included Detective Laura Washington from the Colorado State Police, who would coordinate the law enforcement response when Marcus attempted to implement his staged disappearance in Rocky Mountain National Park. Detective Washington's expertise in wilderness search and rescue operations provided crucial insights about the specific methods Marcus planned to use, while ensuring that law enforcement would be positioned to document his fraud attempt comprehensively. The location your husband selected for his staged disappearance has been used for similar fraud schemes previously, which provides us with detailed knowledge about the methods typically employed and the evidence that can be gathered, Detective Washington explained. Our preparation will ensure that his fraud attempt will be documented from multiple perspectives while protecting your safety throughout the process. The coordination with Colorado law enforcement provided confidence that Marcus's scheme would be prevented effectively while generating evidence that would ensure successful prosecution. The multi-jurisdictional cooperation demonstrated the professional recognition that my case had received while providing resources that would guarantee comprehensive accountability for all criminal activities involved. The professional relationships I was developing through the investigation provided stark contrast to the manipulative dynamics that had characterized my marriage with Marcus. These authentic professional connections were based on mutual respect, shared objectives, and recognition of individual capabilities, rather than control and exploitation. The experience was teaching me to recognize healthy relationship patterns while appreciating the value of genuine collaboration and support. The most significant addition to my support network came through introduction to Jennifer Martinez, a victim advocate with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who specialized in supporting individuals who had experienced sophisticated manipulation and fraud. Jennifer's expertise in trauma recovery and victim empowerment provided additional psychological support while connecting me with other survivors who had overcome similar experiences. Your experience with systematic manipulation and your successful resistance to criminal exploitation demonstrate resilience and capability that can inspire other victims while contributing to improved law enforcement responses to complex fraud schemes, Jennifer explained. The strength you have developed through this experience represents valuable knowledge that can help others who face similar challenges. The connection with other fraud survivors provided perspective about recovery and rebuilding that complemented the therapeutic support I was receiving from Dr. Hoffman. The shared experiences revealed that recovery from sophisticated manipulation was not only possible, but could result in enhanced awareness and capability that provided protection against future exploitation, while creating opportunities for helping others. The victim advocacy support also provided practical guidance about legal procedures, financial recovery processes, and protective measures that would ensure my safety and security throughout the prosecution and beyond. Jennifer's expertise helped me understand my rights and options while preparing for the various challenges that would arise during the criminal justice process. The expanded support network was transforming my understanding of the investigation from personal protection effort into contribution to broader justice objectives that would benefit multiple victims and prevent future criminal exploitation. The professional relationships I had developed represented authentic connections that would continue beyond the immediate crisis while providing foundation for career development and personal growth. The most valuable aspect of the expanded professional network was the recognition that my analytical capabilities and investigative instincts represented transferable skills that could be applied to various career opportunities in criminal justice, financial investigation, and victim advocacy. The experience was revealing interests and aptitudes that had been suppressed during my marriage but represented genuine aspects of my personality and professional potential. Agent Reynolds discussed potential career opportunities in federal law enforcement that would allow me to apply the skills I had developed while contributing to investigations that protected other potential victims. The possibility of transforming my traumatic experience into meaningful career development provided hope and direction for rebuilding my life after Marcus's prosecution. The professional validation and career opportunities emerging from my investigation experience demonstrated that Marcus's manipulation had ultimately failed to achieve its intended objectives. Rather than destroying my capability and independence, his betrayal had revealed strengths and competencies that would enable me to build a more authentic and fulfilling life than anything I had experienced during our marriage. The woman Marcus had attempted to exploit and abandon was being replaced by someone who understood criminal manipulation techniques, possessed valuable investigative capabilities, and had developed a network of professional relationships that would support continued growth and contribution to justice objectives. His scheme would indeed result in transformation, but the transformation would demonstrate my strength rather than his successful exploitation. The final confrontation began on Wednesday morning, May 30th, when Marcus announced his departure for Colorado, with the casual confidence of someone implementing a carefully planned operation. His demeanor reflected the satisfaction of a professional who had completed thorough preparation and anticipated successful execution of complex objectives. The irony of his confidence provided psychological foundation for maintaining my composure during interactions that would determine whether his elaborate fraud scheme would succeed or result in comprehensive criminal prosecution. Agent Reynolds had positioned federal surveillance resources throughout our neighborhood to document Marcus's departure while ensuring my safety during the critical transition period when he would be most vulnerable to suspicion about my awareness of his true intentions. The surveillance coordination required precise timing to capture evidence of criminal activity while avoiding premature intervention that could compromise prosecution objectives or create safety risks for law enforcement personnel. Marcus's preparation routine that morning followed patterns that had been predicted through analysis of similar fraud schemes conducted by Torino's organization. His equipment loading, route planning, and communication procedures reflected professional training in staging disappearances while maintaining plausible explanations for all activities. However, his adherence to established patterns also ensured that law enforcement resources were positioned to document every aspect of his fraud implementation. The most challenging aspect of the morning was maintaining normal interaction patterns, while internal excitement and anxiety threatened to compromise my performance as an unknowing spouse. The psychological preparation provided by Dr. Hoffman proved invaluable for managing emotional responses that could have alerted Marcus to my awareness of his true intentions. The systematic breathing techniques and compartmentalization methods enabled me to express appropriate concern about his solo hiking expedition while suppressing knowledge that would have been impossible to conceal without professional guidance. Diana, I know you worry about my hiking activities, but this expedition represents exactly the kind of personal challenge I need for gaining perspective about our future priorities, Marcus explained, while loading specialized equipment that would support his actual escape rather than recreational hiking. The photography opportunities alone justify the investment in time and preparation. His explanation demonstrated the sophisticated deception techniques that had characterized our entire marriage, combining genuine enthusiasm with calculated misdirection to create emotional authenticity while concealing criminal objectives. The performance required acknowledging that Marcus possessed genuine talent for manipulation that would have challenged even experienced investigators if they had not been prepared for his specific methods. My response required expressing appropriate spousal concern while gathering final intelligence about his timeline and planned communication schedule. The information would be crucial for ensuring that law enforcement intervention occurred at optimal moments for evidence collection, while preventing his fraud from progressing to stages that could create complications for prosecution or asset recovery. I want you to enjoy the solitude and photography, but please maintain your planned communication schedule so I will not worry unnecessarily, I replied, establishing reasonable expectations that would provide framework for detecting deviations from his stated plans. The wilderness can be unpredictable, and I need to know you are safe. The communication schedule Marcus provided included specific check-in times and backup procedures that reflected professional understanding of how to maintain credible contact while preparing to disappear permanently. However, his detailed explanations also provided law enforcement with precise information about when and how his fraud attempt would be implemented. Agent Reynolds had coordinated with Colorado authorities to ensure that Marcus's arrival at Rocky Mountain National Park would be monitored continuously while maintaining the appearance of normal recreational activity. The surveillance resources included wilderness specialists who could document his activities without detection, while ensuring that his fraud attempt would be prevented before reaching stages that could complicate prosecution or create safety risks. The departure itself was emotionally devastating, despite my intellectual understanding that Marcus's expressions of affection were calculated performance rather than genuine emotion. His final embrace and expressions of love represented the culmination of 12 years of systematic manipulation, designed to ensure my emotional investment in his safe return, while he implemented plans for permanent abandonment and financial exploitation. However, the knowledge that his manipulation would result in comprehensive criminal prosecution rather than successful fraud provided psychological foundation for enduring the immediate emotional pain while maintaining focus on justice objectives. The woman he was embracing represented his fundamental miscalculation about my capabilities and determination rather than the vulnerable victim he believed he was abandoning. The surveillance coordination phase began immediately after Marcus's departure, with Agent Reynolds providing regular updates about his travel progress, while Colorado authorities prepared for intervention when he attempted to implement his staged disappearance. The real-time intelligence provided confidence that every aspect of his fraud scheme was being documented, while ensuring that my safety remained the highest priority throughout the operation. The most significant development occurred Thursday afternoon when Colorado surveillance detected Marcus meeting with unknown associates at a remote location near his planned hiking area. The meeting involved transfer of additional equipment and final coordination of disappearance procedures that confirmed law enforcement predictions about the conspiracy's methods while providing additional evidence for prosecution purposes. Your husband's meeting with Torino's Colorado associates has provided exactly the evidence we needed to document the full scope of the criminal conspiracy, Agent Reynolds reported during our scheduled briefing. The coordination we observed confirms that his disappearance attempt will follow established patterns that we are prepared to intercept comprehensively. The intelligence about Marcus's coordination meeting provided final confirmation that his fraud scheme was proceeding according to predictions, while ensuring that law enforcement intervention would occur at optimal moments for evidence collection and prosecution success. The systematic documentation of his criminal activities would ensure that his betrayal would result in appropriate legal consequences, rather than successful escape. Friday morning brought the implementation phase when Marcus entered Rocky Mountain National Park to begin his staged hiking expedition. Colorado authorities maintained discreet surveillance while allowing him to proceed with initial activities that would establish his presence in the area and create foundation for his planned disappearance claim. The surveillance coordination required precise balance between evidence collection and intervention timing to ensure comprehensive documentation while preventing actual harm. The critical moment arrived Friday afternoon, when Marcus began implementing the staged accident that would support his death claim. Colorado authorities documented his deviation from legitimate hiking activities to meet additional conspirators who would assist with his disappearance, while providing false evidence about hiking accident circumstances. The real-time documentation captured every aspect of the fraud implementation, while ensuring that his scheme would fail completely. Agent Reynolds coordinated the intervention that occurred when Marcus and his associates attempted to stage evidence of a fatal hiking accident. The timing ensured that all criminal activities were documented thoroughly, while preventing the fraud from progressing to stages that could create complications for insurance claim processing or criminal prosecution. Mrs. Castellano, your husband and his associates have been arrested while attempting to implement insurance fraud that would have defrauded insurance companies of $800,000, while leaving you legally and financially responsible for debt obligations you did not create, Agent Reynolds reported immediately after the arrests. The evidence we gathered through your cooperation ensures that their criminal activities will result in comprehensive prosecution rather than successful fraud. The news of Marcus's arrest created emotional responses that combined relief, vindication, and profound sadness about the destruction of relationships that had defined my adult life. However, the knowledge that his manipulation had failed completely while contributing to broader justice objectives provided foundation for processing these emotions constructively rather than allowing them to create lasting psychological damage. The arrest also triggered asset forfeiture procedures that would recover funds Marcus had stolen while ensuring that his criminal activities would not generate lasting financial benefit. Victoria Chen from the FBI Asset Forfeiture Division confirmed that comprehensive financial recovery was possible because federal authorities had traced his financial manipulation activities and identified assets that could be returned to legitimate ownership. The most satisfying aspect of the confrontation outcome was recognition that Marcus's sophisticated manipulation techniques had ultimately failed because he had underestimated my analytical capabilities and determination. His assumption that I would remain ignorant about his criminal activities while cooperating unknowingly with his fraud scheme had enabled law enforcement to document his activities comprehensively while ensuring his prosecution for multiple criminal charges. The successful confrontation represented validation of the investigative approach I had developed, while demonstrating that systematic analysis and professional collaboration could overcome even sophisticated criminal manipulation. The woman Marcus had attempted to exploit and abandon had proven capable of ensuring accountability for his betrayal while contributing to justice objectives that would protect other potential victims. The transformation from victim to successful investigator represented personal growth that would provide foundation for rebuilding my life with authentic relationships and meaningful professional contributions. Marcus's scheme had indeed resulted in death, but the death was of my naive trust in manipulation rather than my capability for independence and success. The immediate aftermath of Marcus's arrest required navigating complex legal and financial procedures that would formally sever all connections to his criminal activities, while establishing my complete independence from the manipulation that had defined our marriage. Agent Reynolds coordinated with federal prosecutors to ensure that my cooperation with the investigation would be properly documented and protected, while Victoria Chen from the Asset Forfeiture Division began comprehensive procedures for recovering funds that Marcus had stolen through systematic financial manipulation. The legal separation process involved more than simply ending our marriage through conventional divorce proceedings. Federal prosecutors required detailed documentation of how Marcus's criminal activities had affected our joint financial obligations, property ownership, and legal responsibilities to ensure that I would not bear legal liability for debts and commitments that had been created through fraudulent activities. This documentation process provided opportunities to demonstrate the comprehensive nature of his deception while establishing clear legal boundaries between his criminal choices and my legitimate interests. Victoria Chen's financial investigation revealed that Marcus's theft of our joint resources had been more extensive than even my systematic analysis had uncovered. His manipulation of our financial accounts, unauthorized use of my electronic signatures, and creation of debt obligations in both our names represented criminal activities that totaled over $300,000 in direct financial damage. However, federal asset forfeiture procedures would enable recovery of most stolen funds while preventing Marcus from benefiting financially from his criminal activities. Mrs. Castellano, the systematic nature of your husband's financial manipulation creates clear legal framework for comprehensive asset recovery, because federal law recognizes that criminal activities cannot generate legitimate financial benefit for perpetrators, Victoria explained during our detailed financial review session. The evidence you gathered through your investigation provides documentation that will ensure successful recovery of funds while protecting you from legal liability for obligations created through fraudulent activities. The asset recovery process demonstrated practical benefits of my decision to conduct systematic investigation rather than simply confronting Marcus about suspicious activities. The detailed documentation I had gathered provided legal foundation for distinguishing between legitimate joint obligations and fraudulent debt creation, ensuring that my financial recovery would be comprehensive rather than partial. The most significant aspect of the legal separation was establishing complete independence from Marcus's continuing legal obligations as his criminal case proceeded through federal prosecution. The evidence of systematic manipulation and financial fraud provided clear legal basis for severing all financial connections, while ensuring that his prosecution would not create additional legal complications for my independent financial recovery. Federal prosecutors arranged for victim advocate services that would protect my interests throughout the criminal justice process, while ensuring that my cooperation with the investigation would be properly recognized and protected. Jennifer Martinez coordinated with federal victim assistance programs to provide ongoing support for managing legal procedures, financial recovery, and personal protection during the prosecution timeline. Your cooperation with this investigation has been crucial for exposing criminal activities that extend far beyond your individual case, Jennifer explained. Federal victim protection procedures will ensure that your interests are safeguarded throughout the prosecution, while providing resources for complete recovery from the manipulation and fraud you experienced. The victim protection services included ongoing psychological support, financial counseling, and legal assistance that would ensure my transition to independence would be supported by professional resources, rather than requiring me to navigate complex recovery procedures without guidance. These services represented recognition that sophisticated manipulation created recovery challenges that required specialized support for successful resolution. The immediate practical challenges of establishing independent living arrangements required careful coordination with federal authorities to ensure that my safety would be protected while Marcus's associates remained subject to ongoing criminal investigation. Detective Martinez arranged for enhanced security measures that would protect my residence and workplace, while allowing me to resume normal professional activities without compromising the broader investigation. The security arrangements included discreet monitoring that would detect any attempts by Torino's organization to interfere with my recovery or retaliate for my cooperation with law enforcement. The protection procedures demonstrated federal recognition that sophisticated criminal organizations often attempted to intimidate or harm individuals who contributed to their exposure and prosecution. However, the most important aspect of breaking free from Marcus's manipulation involved psychological recovery that would enable me to rebuild authentic relationships and pursue meaningful professional opportunities without the conditioning that had limited my independence throughout our marriage. Dr. Hoffman continued providing therapeutic support that helped me understand the systematic nature of the conditioning I had experienced, while developing strategies for recognizing and resisting manipulation techniques in future relationships. Your recovery from systematic manipulation demonstrates emotional resilience and intellectual capability that will provide foundation for building authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than control and exploitation, Dr. Hoffman observed during our sessions. The analytical skills that enabled you to expose criminal deception will also help you recognize healthy relationship dynamics and protect your independence in future personal and professional situations. The therapeutic support was particularly valuable for processing the complex emotions that accompanied recognition of my complete independence after 12 years of systematic control. The freedom to make decisions without manipulation, pursue interests without interference, and build relationships without hidden agendas created opportunities that were simultaneously exhilarating and overwhelming. The professional validation I had received from federal investigators provided confidence for exploring career opportunities that would apply the investigative skills I had developed, while contributing to justice objectives that extended beyond my personal situation. Agent Reynolds discussed potential positions with federal law enforcement agencies that would allow me to support criminal investigations while building meaningful career development around analytical capabilities and investigative instincts. Your background in financial analysis combined with your demonstrated investigative capabilities and experience with sophisticated criminal schemes would be valuable for various federal law enforcement positions, Agent Reynolds explained. The experience you gained through this investigation provides practical knowledge that cannot be taught through conventional training programs. The career opportunities represented unexpected benefits that transformed my traumatic experience into foundation for meaningful professional development. The possibility of contributing to criminal investigations that would protect other potential victims provided purpose and direction that would enable me to build a career around values of justice and protection rather than simply financial advancement. The financial recovery process provided additional foundation for independence by ensuring that Marcus's theft would not create lasting economic damage that could limit my options for rebuilding my life. Victoria Chen's coordination of asset forfeiture procedures was recovering funds systematically while establishing clear legal ownership of property and investments that Marcus had attempted to steal or manipulate. The comprehensive nature of the financial recovery was particularly satisfying because it demonstrated that criminal manipulation ultimately failed to achieve lasting advantage for perpetrators. Marcus's elaborate scheme had required extensive planning and professional assistance, but the criminal justice system was designed to ensure that such activities would not generate sustainable benefits for those who victimized others. The most meaningful aspect of breaking free from Marcus's manipulation was recognition that my authentic personality and capabilities had survived 12 years of systematic conditioning designed to limit my independence and exploit my trust. The woman I was becoming represented genuine aspects of my character that had been suppressed during our marriage but were emerging as manipulation was removed and authentic support was provided. The professional relationships I had developed during the investigation provided examples of healthy collaboration based on mutual respect, shared objectives, and recognition of individual capabilities. These authentic connections contrasted sharply with the manipulative dynamics that had characterized my marriage, while providing foundation for understanding how genuine partnerships should function. The support network I had built through federal law enforcement, victim advocacy services, and therapeutic resources represented social capital that would continue supporting my recovery and professional development long after Marcus's prosecution was completed. These relationships demonstrated that authentic connections could be built through competent professional performance and mutual respect, rather than manipulation and control. The transformation from victim of systematic manipulation to successful investigator, whose contributions had exposed criminal activities and protected other potential victims, represented personal growth that would provide confidence for pursuing ambitious, professional, and personal objectives. The experience had revealed capabilities and interests that conventional career paths had not allowed me to explore, while providing practical knowledge about criminal investigation and victim advocacy. The woman Marcus had attempted to exploit and abandon had proven capable of ensuring comprehensive accountability for his betrayal while contributing to justice objectives that would prevent other families from experiencing similar victimization. His manipulation had ultimately failed because he had underestimated my intelligence, analytical capabilities, and determination to protect myself and others from criminal exploitation. The process of establishing independent living arrangements marked the beginning of practical recovery that would transform the theoretical freedom from Marcus's manipulation into sustainable personal and professional autonomy. The Federal Victim Assistance Program provided temporary housing security while I located appropriate permanent residence that would support both my immediate safety needs and my long-term career development objectives. The search for housing represented the first major decision I had made independently in 12 years, requiring confidence in my judgment and preferences that had been systematically undermined during my marriage. The selection of a downtown Chicago condominium near both Meridian Investment Group and federal law enforcement facilities reflected strategic thinking about professional development, while providing symbolic separation from the suburban home, where Marcus had conducted his systematic manipulation. The new residence would support my existing career responsibilities while positioning me for potential transition to federal law enforcement opportunities that Agent Reynolds had discussed. The process of furnishing and organizing the new residence provided opportunities to discover personal preferences that had been suppressed during marriage to someone who controlled domestic decisions through manipulation and economic pressure. The choice of furniture, artwork, and organizational systems reflected authentic tastes that emerged when external pressure and criticism were removed. These seemingly minor decisions represented significant psychological recovery because they demonstrated restored confidence in personal judgment and aesthetic preferences. Dr. Hoffman continued providing therapeutic support that helped me understand the relationship between environmental control and psychological manipulation, while developing strategies for creating living spaces that would support independence rather than dependence. The therapeutic sessions addressed practical aspects of recovery, including decision-making confidence, boundary establishment, and relationship evaluation skills that would protect against future manipulation while enabling authentic connection. Your ability to make independent decisions about personal preferences demonstrates significant psychological recovery from the conditioning you experienced, Dr. Hoffman observed during our sessions. The confidence you are developing in trusting your judgment will provide foundation for making larger decisions about career development and relationship building without external validation or approval. The most challenging aspect of independent living involved managing social isolation that resulted from Marcus's systematic limitation of my friendships and professional relationships throughout our marriage. The manipulation had been subtle but effective in creating dependence on his social connections, while discouraging independent relationship building that might have provided perspective about his controlling behavior. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.